ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येम अक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैर्तुष्टुवांसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति नः इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नः तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्ददातु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः देवं नारायणं नत्वा सर्वदोषविवर्जितं परिपूर्णं गुरुंश्चान् गीतार्थं वक्ष्यामि लेशतः. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to friends who've joined today's satsang. Today we are doing Gita Upanishad Chinthana part C of chapter 2. So may I invite Anandji to take a lead on this session and coordinate this. Anand, over to you.
Hari Om Sri Krishnaya Namaha. Thank you, Madhuji. My namaskars to all the participants of this session. So we continue with the chapter 2 Sankhya Yoga. This is the final session, part C. So we have some good speakers today. We will start with the introduction to Karma Yoga, which is covered by 47 to 53 verses by Shashrutji. This will be followed by verses 54 to 65, which covers the topic of Sthita Prajna. We have Harisji and Neetaji to take us through that. But before we go on to that, let us have a quick recap on what we did in the last session. Next slide, please. So in the last session, we dealt with Dharma of Kshatriya. So we heard from Lord Krishna's logical explanation as to why Arjuna has to fight, what are the consequences of not fighting, and what was the gain for fighting, and with what mental attitude one should fight. And all this was to establish dharma. It was a dharma yuddha, which meant on the side of righteousness and with set rules. Next slide, please. Then we entered the section of yoga, part of the Sankhya Yoga, which is a method or process of acquiring the knowledge, which is the Sankhya knowledge, and mastering it. So we discussed a number of topics like spiritual journey is not a wasted effort. There is every degree of success. Then we learned that there is only one teaching that leads to decisive spiritual knowledge, that is Vedas. Vyavasayatmika buddhihi ekehe kurunandana. There is only one teaching that leads to the decisive knowledge. Next click, please. And then we heard that Vedas, all rituals in Vedas, all ceremonies in the Vedas, and all the words, letters in the Vedas are meaningful. They are founded on dharma, and they are concerned with the spiritual welfare of human existence. Kamya karma is for selfish desire, whereas karma yoga is the karma performed without selfish desire. Next slide, please. So, the overarching theme in the last session, by the time we concluded, was don't hanker after the fruits, abandon the desirous motives, perform the actions without seeking specific rewards, do it with the sole aim of pleasing the Lord. And we ended saying that we should all become nistraigunya, meaning transcending the three gunas by being nirdvandva, nityasatvastha, niryogakshema, and atmavan. So that was what we discussed last time. And with this background, Lord Krishna now proceeds to Bhagavad Gita's doctrine of Karma Yoga, and he elaborates this in chapter 3, following Arjuna's further questions. I request Shashrutji to take us through the next set of verses, please. Shashrutji, thank you.
Gurubhyo Namah Hari Om. Thank you, Anandji. So moving on to Karma Yoga, of course, we are going to do Karma Yoga properly as a whole chapter in chapter 3. But this particular shloka, Shloka 47 is probably one of the most popular verses of the Bhagavad Gita ever. And even every child in India learns Bhagavad Gita, and this is the first shloka that they learn. So the purport obviously is that you have a right to perform your prescribed duties, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions, and never to consider yourself to be the results of your activities and not to be attached to inaction. So next slide, please. So let's start with some very basics of what is karma. So we know that karma is action, karma is also speech, karma is also our thoughts. And we have learned from Acharya that karma is not some fuzzy, non real entity, it is a physical entity which is attached to our linga sharira. So every action, every karma that we do has repercussions and it leaves a mark on our soul. So it is a real entity. We also know that karma has been equated to dharma. So the right types of karma will be dharma. What is dharma? Uh, we have done that already. In terms of karma itself, going back to Ishavasya Upanishad, Madhuji has covered this topic for almost 1 hour in Ishavasya Upanishad. So those who have missed it, I urge you to go back and listen to it. In therein, he mentioned to split the word karma into two words. Kara, kara is tax, income tax. People know kara department, Ayakar department, and Ma is knowledge. So what we have to have is the right knowledge, and we have to repay our taxes to society. So if we do the right actions, they are going to be of some benefit to society, and that will equate karma to dharma. Briefly, let me touch upon the aspect of who is the doer. Again, we have covered this many times before in terms of the Bimba Pratibimba model. So we know that we are the Pratibimba of the Lord. So we are the person in the mirror. We cannot do any actions independently, and we are forever, forever dependent on the Lord for our actions. We have also covered the analogy of the chariot when we did Katha Upanishad as well as in Bhagavad Gita Chinthana before, and I'm sure this will be repeated in further slides as well. Once again, the main experiencer of all the indriyas is the soul, the jiva, which is also the sakshi. So we must bear that in mind. Next slide, please. It is inevitable that everyone has to perform actions. You cannot have anyone sitting even in a quiet room without any actions, because even thoughts are actions. So everyone has to perform karma. The only time we are not performing karma is when we are asleep, or once before the age of 14 and after the age of 80, where these karmas do not actually are not applicable to the linga sharira. But at all other times, whatever we do, karma will be applicable and we cannot avoid it. So we have to do the right type of karma. Now, we as mere jivas have no right to decide what the outcome of our action is going to be, which leads us to another massive topic called Jiva Kartutvavada. And I'm sure in the future sessions we will be discussing this in more detail, probably as part of chapter 3. But needless to say, as part of the Bimba Pratibimba, we are completely dependent upon the mercy of the Lord. So it is said that man proposes and God disposes. So here I am talking to you and I say I'm going to finish this lecture. But if God decides it's not going to happen, I will lose my voice, the electricity might fail, the internet might conk off, and this lecture will not happen. So much as we want it to happen, if God does not wish it to happen, it will not. So we have to give up this pride of doership. It was never I am doing this, and we have to remember na aham karta, hari karta. So whatever we do, we have to thank the Lord to permit us to do such good activities. The next word I would like to pick is karma phala. So karma phala is the fruits of our action. We must not allow the fruits of our action be the driving force for our actions. So one must not say, I'm going to go to work because I'm getting a salary or because it inflates my bank balance. That is not really the reason why one should go to work. One should go to work because the work that we do is going to benefit society in general, and in that is our service to the Lord. So we must try and remember that at all times, so that the karmas that we do are towards a loftier goal. It is always said we should not have any aspirations towards the fruits of our actions. So does that mean we cannot aspire for any higher goals as well? Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Suresh here.
Yeah.
The desire to do this is also a desire, right? Wanting to do it. So I don't think there's anything. If a karma, I mean, this is desires which have wrong intentions, are the ones that we should not have. We should have desires to attain moksha or to advance in our understanding of the Lord, etc. Right?
Yes, thank you, Surajji. Let's move on to the next slide then. Very good. So it is definitely not prohibited for us to perform activities with which lead us to higher spiritual knowledge and towards the Lord's grace, as Surajji said. What we want to avoid is expectations that are going to give us temporary or material benefits. So the actions that we do should lead towards moksha. And those actions, if that is our aim and that is our expectation, then that's allowed. We did cover Ishavasya Upanishad in great detail, and verse 2 effectively is all about karma yoga. And in this particular verse, it is said that one is going to live 100 years on this earth. We are all going to do karma all the while. But how should one do this karma? And in here it is says that the karma should be dedicated to the Lord, Iha. And you have to do the right types of karmas. These karmas are yajna, dana, and tapa. And all these karmas should be done with the full knowledge. These are jnanottara karmas. And if you do it properly with the right knowledge, then these karmas do not stick to you. So, na lipyate nare. So, the attitude in which actions are done has a big say in whether these karmas will cling to you or they won't. Same thing is said in Purusha Suktam. Yajneni yajnamayanta deva sthani dharmani prathamanyasan. So the first and foremost duty is to worship and surrender to the Lord. And if you do that, then the karmas will not cling to you. So the last part of the first shloka refers to avoidance of duties. So what happens if one avoids the duties? So next slide, please. So this is called akarmani or inaction. And inaction, Lord is very clear, it will incur sin. So it is similar to the soldier who refuses to go to war, goes AWOL, and that soldier is definitely going to face court martial. Me as a doctor, if I am on call and I refuse to go and attend an emergency patient, then I will be hauled up before the GMC. So there is no escaping our duty, and that duty has to be done at the right time with the right attitude. So akarmani is simply not an option. And this is what Lord Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna, that you cannot avoid war or you cannot avoid your duty. We have said that we should not really be hankering after the fruits of our actions. Yet plenty of our shlokas will have falashrutis in them. So, for example, I have put here Vishnu Sahasranama, and in there is falashruti shlokas which say what is the benefit for brahmanas, what is the benefit for kshatriyas, what is the benefit for vaishyas, what is the benefit for shudras. So the 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 scriptures themselves are giving phalas to say if you do this you will get this. So why are we doing that? And the answer to that question is to really entice people and encourage people towards Vedanta. So the common man really has, those who do not have the knowledge will not want to start going down this path. We know there are four types of bhaktas as described in the Bhagavad Gita, and the jnanis do not need any stimulation to follow the Vedanta, but all the other types of bhaktas do need some encouragement to start on this path. So it's like saying to a young child, if you take this bitter medicine, I will give you a sweet afterwards. So it's almost like a little bit of bribery, but we know that that medicine is going to benefit this child. So we will offer that to the child for the greater benefit of that child. And that is why we have some falashrutis. So overall, in the first shloka, Lord Krishna is instructing Arjuna not to shirk from his duties, not to do inaction, but fight for a just cause and not think of the results of his actions, of the thought of losing his loved ones. So let's move on to the next shloka. So the next shloka is also very popularly known, and the purport is to be steadfast in the performance of the duty, abandoning attachment to success and failure, and such equanimity is called yoga. So Krishna is telling Arjuna how one should perform karmas, and through Arjuna he is telling us as well. So he is telling Arjuna, take the good with the bad. Okay, whatever you do, your actions are going to sometimes have good results, sometimes they will have bad results. And you have to accept them all because that is the will of God. If you are going to get upset with a bad result and then have further bad results as a result of that, then it doesn't lead to a good outcome. So if you are playing a cricket match, you might have a bad shot, you might get out, but you have a second innings, you will get another chance to do well. So you have to accept that you might have a bad result one day, but that is the will of God. In this particular shloka, the word Dhananjaya is used to describe Arjuna. And we know that Arjuna has several names attached to him as a description to his characteristics throughout the Bhagavad Gita. So, does anyone know why the word Dhananjaya has been used in this context?
Can I try, Shushraji?
Yeah, please.
So maybe on two counts. One is Arjuna was the finance minister in Yudhishthira's court. So he was anyway responsible to fill the coffers by defeating enemies, and material wealth he had to anyway get. So that
Yeah.
was one. The other, the real dhana is jnana, I mean knowledge. So he is the one who had acquired knowledge to be called as Dhananjaya. So that's how I.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, you had covered Arjuna's qualities in your lecture. So one of them, as you rightly said, was that he was very astute financially, and he had conquered lots of kingdoms as a part of the Rajasuya Yajna and collected a lot of wealth for Yudhishthira. So let's move on to the next slide. So he there is a story in Shanti Parva where Yudhishthira is discussing the Purusharthas with his brothers, and Arjuna is talking about the importance of wealth in there. So he is also referring to this, and at the same time, Bhimasena is extolling the virtues of karma and work and duty. Then this story appears in Shanti Parva. So Arjuna has always been associated with wealth. So is wealth bad? Well, I mean, we all work for a living and we do get a salary. So that does come along our path of duty. It's an incident. It should not be our motivation for work. And this is probably what Lord Krishna is alluding to as when he refers to Arjuna as Dhananjaya. Don't go after material wealth. Think beyond wealth. You have to conquer wealth. And that is why he's calling him Dhananjaya. So that's just a interesting thing I came across. Thought I would share. Yeah, sorry. So the next shloka refers to different types of karma and how to do it. And in here, the karma that is referred to in the first line is the kamya karma, which Anandji referred to. It is the ritualistic part of the Vedas, and we have been learning about this in Mundaka Upanishad as well, with Shaunaka doing these Mahayagnas, and he's asking Angirasa how to get the true benefit out of it. So we are learning that in Mundaka Upanishad anyway. So here Lord Krishna is referring to Buddhi Yoga to Arjuna. Buddhi Yoga is the correct or true jnana which is going to lead to moksha. Then he refers to the word sharanam. So what he is saying is that even after you have got the knowledge which is going to lead you to moksha, you have to seek refuge in Vishnu. So there is no time where you are not going to be dependent on the Lord. Forever we are going to be under his protection or sharanam. So that word was quite interesting for me as well. Then we move on to the next part, which is called Falahetava. So the Falahetava is someone who actually grants your wishes. You could also take it as to saying those are the results of the action, Falahetava, and you are not hankering after the fruits of the action, but also Raghavendra Swamiji has in Gita Vivrutti has said, Falahetava is someone who grants our wishes. And even if one has the right spiritual knowledge, what he's saying is that they cannot claim to be God himself. Unlike some friends in other schools who think that once they have the right knowledge, they become God. And that is being refuted by Raghavendra Swamiji. And he is actually calling them Krupana or pitiable. So if you think you are going to become God, then only God can help you. Next slide, please. So the word Krupana has multiple meanings. In the purport, it is called miserly by Swami Mukundananda, but it is also called pitiable. And the word Krupana could mean a worm. A worm has got only very, very basic instincts. It only moves towards light and food. It could refer to a dull man or a savage who has no intellect for reasoning purposes. It could refer to a slave who has no freedom in his actions. And it could refer to a miser who hugs his wealth, who likes to go to Swarga. And what Lord Krishna is telling us is that we need to evolve into a higher being above all these krupanas and mature into higher spiritual levels. So that is what we are all aiming for in this satsang. Next slide, please. The verse 50 is probably going to give us the summary of the Karma Yoga, the benefits of superior action. So, Lord Krishna here is saying the one who practices yoga without attachment can get rid of good and bad reactions in this life itself. And therefore, he's telling Arjuna to strive for this yoga, which is the art of working skillfully with the right consciousness. So the word that struck me in this particular shloka is the word of kaushalam. So in this audience, we all professionals with our own skill sets. We have neurosurgeons, we have psychiatrists, we have oncologists, and so I personally am a surgeon. So we all have some skills which is part of our duty, and our, as we have said, each one has our prescribed duty, which is our karma, our yoga. And the skill or kaushalam in our life is going to be try and convert our day-to-day actions into something more pious, something at a higher level. And that's why I like that word kaushalam in this particular verse. So we have to try and do our day-to-day activities in a way that is going to promote spiritual upliftment, and that practice would be our yoga. Next slide, please. In this verse, it is also said that you get rid of both good and bad deeds, and that just seems to be a little bit odd, because we are all trying to do good deeds, and good deeds would incur good karmas. So why would one want to get rid of good karmas? We want to accumulate good karmas. So again, Raghendra Swamiji in Gita Vivrutti has said that good deeds are of two kinds. Ones that will be permanent and be leading to a more clarity in divine knowledge and a higher level of happiness in moksha, and he calls these as Ishta Punya. And then some other types of good deeds which do not lead to permanent happiness. So the what Lord Krishna is saying is that we need to get rid of these second types of good deeds, which we have to use up in this world, or in either in current or in future births. So if you do certain types of good deeds, you might end up in Swargaloka, and you might enjoy life in Swargaloka for some time, but eventually you will have to come back to earth and relive more lives, leading to more karma. So the aim is to try and get rid of even those type of good deeds which will stop you having to come back to earth and have rebirth. So all we want to do is to try and accumulate ishta punya. Next slide, please. So the next verse 51, is trying to answer two questions. What leads to jnana, and what does jnana lead to? So the purport says that the wise endowed with equanimity of intellect abandon attachment to the fruits of actions which bind one to the cycle of life and death, and by working in such consciousness they attain the state beyond all suffering. So what is going to lead to jnana? And we have done this before as to how we accumulate knowledge. So the next slide, please. So we have already heard about two different types of knowledge in Mundaka Upanishad, Aparavidya and Paravidya. And we have also seen how we can get knowledge. So we can get indirect knowledge from reading books, listening to Gurujis, listening to lectures online. So those are indirect forms of knowledge which will help us learn about God. And then the direct knowledge, which is aparoksha jnana. And if we are fortunate enough to see our the Lord inside us, the Manishina have done that. So that is the direct knowledge of the Lord. And we know that it is only aparoksha jnana that is going to burn all our karmas. And that is going to lead us to moksha or padam. So in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Jnanagni sarva karmani bhasmasat kurute tatha. That is, I've given there verse 37. So just a little quiz. Does anyone know which chapter of Gita this comes from?
Chapter 4, Sushil?
Yeah, chapter
Suresh
4.
ji, yes, chapter 4, it is absolutely correct. So chapter 4 says the same thing. So you need aproksha jnana, and that is going to get rid of all our karmas and lead us to moksha. So next slide, please. So verse 52 says, in verse 52, Lord Krishna is answering the question of Arjuna as to how he's going to actually understand the teachings delivered and the teachings to come so far. So, what he is telling Arjuna is that you have to clean your mind of all the ignorant viewpoints. If your mind has the wrong ideas, then you will not readily accept the correct teachings, even though they have been taught to you. So you have to cleanse your mind of all your ignorant viewpoints, and then and only then will your mind be able to grasp the teachings properly. Next slide, please. So, moha in this particular shloka refers to ignorance or confusion, which could be the wrong interpretation of the Vedas. So, we know that there have been multiple interpretations of the Vedas, some of them incorrect, which Madhuji keeps pointing out to us from time to time. And we have to try and get those thoughts out of our mind and focus our mind on the correct interpretation of the Vedas. And the word nirvedam has been used, which has been described as disattachment or vairagya by some commentators. But according to Sri Madhvacharya, the word nirvedam means full benefit. So you can only get the full benefit of the teaching when you have got rid of the wrong interpretations. So stick to the right path, take away all the wrong interpretations, and follow the correct path. Then Arjuna asks him, how long do I have to do karma yoga? And the answer obviously is, as long as you are alive and in human birth, you're going to keep on doing karma yoga. So till ignorance vanishes, and then you get the full benefit. And once you have aproksha jnana, then all your karmas are going to end. Next slide, please. So we move on to verse 53. So he tells him here that when your intellect ceases to be allured by the fruitive sections of the Vedas, remains steadfast in divine consciousness, then you will attain the stage of perfect yoga. So certain interpretations or translations of the word Shruti Vipratipanna, it means at conflict with the Vedas. So uh, here it is saying you need to not be at conflict with the Vedas. And another interpretation I came across was to mean Shruti Visheshana Pratipanna, which was to mean you have to get the right or the correct viewpoint based on authentic scriptures. And that has been described as the first stage of study. So, to get the right knowledge by listening, Shravana, or by books, which is Drashtavya. Once you have done that, then you have to keep your mind firmly on those correct principles, which would be nischala. So keep your mind steady. And then you move on to that is manana. So you keep thinking about the right methods of achieving moksha. And then you have to do the concentration, which is the third stage, nididhyasana. So in Brahadaranyaka Upanishad, there is this shloka, Atma Vare Drashtavyo Shrotavyo Mantavyo Nididhyasitavya. So we have to learn the right viewpoints, keep revising them, as Madhuji says, manana, and then once our mind is fixed on the Lord, then we can reach yoga mapasi, which is the fruition of the yoga, which would hopefully be aproksha jnana, which should be our ultimate aim. Thank you very much. Krishna promise.
Next one, Madhuji. Thank you, Shashwatji. That was very good. So the message from the previous verses is, when your mind becomes steadfast, nischala, and it becomes steadfast in divine consciousness, you will then attain a state of yoga, a state of samadhi for God realization. This is the stage when no external factors shake you. Nothing can disturb you in the events or situations. Next click, please. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi has said in his autobiography that his life has been full of external tragedies, and if they have not left any visible effect on him, he owes it to teaching of Bhagavad Gita. So I don't know whether he was a Sthita Prajna or not, whether he was a Paroksha Gnani or not, but his life has had Bhagavad Gita has had an impact on his life and his principles. So let's hear from Harish ji and followed by Nita ji as to what this steady state of wisdom means. Harish ji, over to you.
Okay. Hari Om, Shri Krishna Namaha, Jai Shri Ram. So the lead up to this point, Krishna has given some hints of Sthita Prajna or Aparoksha Jnana, and Arjuna has picked up on that. So Sushruti just covered the Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana that leads to the state of yoga. So Arjuna's question, from that is Sthita Prajnasya ka bhasha, Samadhi Tasya Keshava. So what is this thing called? What is the attributes of somebody who is who we call as a Sthita Prajna and the reaching the state of Samadhi? So the question is literally, how does the person talk? How does the person walk? But the real purport is that we understand that ultimately this is the state that we are aiming to reach. What is the benefit of getting there? How does that person behave? How is that person going to be different from how I am today? And therefore, I have an aspiration to, and we all as sadhakas have aspiration to reach there. So that's the question from Arjuna. And really the significance is that, with sustained effort, we can lead to that state and acquire gnana, and also provides a target, for all seekers. Now, how Krishna responds to this is he does in 3 verses describe the qualities of the enlightened person, and then there's a focus on some of the challenges that people will face when they make attempts to control their indriyas or their senses, and what are ways that we can counter those challenges. And then there's also 2 very popular verses on well, if you're not able to control the indriyas, what's the outcome that results from that. And then we'll also talk a little bit about have a discussion on what are ways to gain control and what will be the role of grace when we attempt to reach this state of Sthita Prajna. So when we get there, I'll ask Nita ji to help out as well. So next page, we get into the qualities of the Sthita Prajna, the first part that Krishna talks about. And when we talk about Sthita Prajna, there's also discussion on, is this the same as an enlightened person? Is it the same as somebody who is self-realized or God-realized or a Paroksha Jnani? And there's some, alignment that in general it means someone who is a Paroksha Jnani. So the 3 shlokas that talk about it, the first one, the 55th shloka, says that someone who has renounced all selfish desires and cravings of the mind. So manogatan kaman sarvan prajahati, somebody who has renounced all of the mind-related desires. And atman neva atmana tushtaha, so somebody who's satisfied, with his self. Now in this one, we should probably have some discussion later on whether that atman eva means that is it from self effort or is it from God's grace. And I think there's both points of views that is offered, that atmana means from the Paramatma, which will help you get to that state of self-realization and satisfaction. And in the shloka 56, dukkeshu anudvigvamanaha, so which is where you're unperturbed, in dukkha or in misery, and sukheshu vigadaspraha, not craving for pleasure. So this goes back to what was covered earlier as well by Shushruth, that whether it's good or bad, you're able to maintain that state of equanimity. And vita raga bhaya krodaha, so free from attachment, fear, and anger. And there's more discussion on how these things are related, the attachment, fear, and anger, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. And in shloka 56, sarvatra anibhisneha, so unattached under all conditions. And shubha ashubham prapya na abhidananti na dveshti, so neither are you rejoicing when something shubha or good happens, and nor is there dvesha when something ashubham happens to you. So that going back to further making this point about having equanimity regardless of the outcomes of your karma. Next page. So how do we achieve this? So this seems to be a good state to achieve in. You have the shanti, you have the equanimity. How do we achieve that? And there was this one description I saw in one of the commentaries on Gita by Ramanujacharya, where he takes the same steps and organizes them in stages. So the first stage, is just about getting control of the propensities to go outward. So this is, you're not necessarily solving anything. You're not completely withdrawing your senses, but you're putting a ceiling on it. So you're having control. So I think during our discussion, we talked about craving for sweets as an example. So maybe you just reduce it. You only have it on certain occasions. So that type of very simplistic control on senses would be the first stage. The second stage requires a bit more sadhana, where you're actually withdrawing from the objects. And shloka 58, Sri Krishna talks about gives the example of our tortoise, and how just like how the tortoise is able to very naturally draw its limbs inside when it when it's experiences the threat. And similarly, the threat in our case would be gaining attachment from external objects, and when we see that, being able to withdraw. For our context, it could include in the first stage, you're probably limiting exposure to social media and television and stuff like that. And in stage 2, it is more severe, where you're completely stopping it so that there's no opportunity to get connected with with external sense objects. Now that said, even in this stage, although you're making an effort, the conscious mind is not mastered the senses yet. So if there is external pressure, you're unable to keep it, and you will yield to it, is the point in stage 2. And then in stage 3 is where you are more realized, not fully realized, but I think very evolved, I would say, because you've been able to restrain your senses with sheer willpower. Your internal flame of desire is not completely extinguished. And there's a couple of slokas in here where Sri Krishna actually explains. So he talks about how the rasavarjam is still there in individuals, and the indriyani pramathini haranti prasabam manaha, meaning that senses still have a power over you, and they're able to gain control over you. So for the most part, you feel like it had control, but there's still that inner flame of desire that's not completely extinguished. And there are numerous examples of very evolved rishis that have actually yielded under some pressure. And I think we'll talk about one example of Saurabha Muni in a few minutes. And then when the stage 4 is when you have devoted contemplation of God, and that brings the purification of the mind. And with the purification of mind, that simplifies or really enables you to control your senses. This is when you're able to shed your desires completely. It's completely uprooted from your mind. and you're able to see the vision of the Lord. Now, one thing I would say is that even though it's been organized in these stages, it doesn't mean that we have to go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. You know, what a lot of our acharyas have said is just go. You can go straight to stage 4 and fill your mind with with something that's more elevated, and in this case, of Krishna, of the Lord, and that will help you, achieve all these different stages of controlling your senses and indriyas and realize and God realize. Next page. So when we talk about control of senses, just wanted to double click on that a little bit. So we see that in Katha Upanishad, we have seen the analogy of the chariot. So Atmanam Rathinim Vidhi Shariram Rathime. So if you have this thing, the whole point, just to kind of reinforce it, is that the horses are your senses. Your mind is the rein, and intellect, similar to what was discussed, in earlier slokas. Through good intellect is when you're controlling, you're doing your karmas and you're controlling your mind and your senses. And Katha Upanishad in the second part also admits that the indriyas in general are externally focused. So in some ways we have to overcome that, and this is where this point of a dhiraha. So the dhiraha, or an intelligent man, is one that turns away from the senses, even though naturally they are outwardly facing, and focuses more internally into yourself. So, when we talk about in the next chapter in Karma Yoga, this will come up again. But further on, Krishna also explains that these externally focused senses will have to be subdued, and you'll have to kill the kama. The shatru, he actually calls this kama as a shatru, which is an enemy that you will have to conquer. And Ashtavikra Gita, which is a slightly different type of philosophy, also has this verse that talks about how the being desireless is like being a lion, and when such a lion is roaming around the forest, the elephant of senses just run away, and if they cannot run away, they'll actually serve him like courtiers. So many so we talked about Katha Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, many scriptures actually talk about the importance of not yielding to external senses and focusing more on the internal Atman. In this context, I'll also mention the story about the Saubhari Muni. I found this to be very fascinating. I had not heard of this story, but he was a very evolved rishi who actually used to meditate underwater. And then when in one of such meditations underwater, he actually saw mating of fish. And even though he was so evolved, did extreme penances, just that small glimpse was sufficient for him to start to have the desire. And he came up, and there's a story of how he went to a king, and that king had 50 princesses, and he ended up. I don't want to belabor too much, but it's a very interesting story. We ended up marrying all of them. Even replicating himself 50 times, creating 50 palaces and cities, all of that just because of that one glimpse of what he saw underwater. And that is just to further explain that, even the most, powerful of people, are able to, yield to this. So it gives us a little bit of thing that, so we don't have to feel too bad about it. But on the other hand, there is a way that we can counter this with the dhyana of the Lord. Next page. The one before this. Yeah. So this we've actually gone through this, so I wouldn't spend too much time on it. But what if you do yield, to the pressure of the external senses? Then this is where there's this 8 steps to self-destruction, right? So dhyayato vishayan putsaha. So when you actually are contemplating on objects, and that happens in many forms, right? It could be looking, these days, Instagram is great, right? I mean, everything from, from food to, everything else is something that you'll see. And as you contemplate more on that, you'll start to develop attachment. And as you start to develop attachment, you start to develop craving. And with craving, so either when it gets satisfied, it results in greed, and that greed results in more craving, or it results in not being satisfied, which creates anger. And that anger, we know, krodhat bhavati sammoha, sammohat smriti vibhramaha, so lack of judgment. Because once you have an anger in you, then you're not able to think clearly, and therefore you're not able to decide clearly. And as the lack of judgment results in bewilderment, or your memory loss. And the way I understand memory loss here is more that you may still remember it, but you forget the context, you forget right from wrong. So the whole viveka of that is lost. And once your viveka is lost, then your intelligence is lost as well, and that results into ruin. So what starts off as a simple dhyana on vishayas can result in ruin if we are not careful about it. So that's what these two shlokas summarize. And then finally, the role of grace. So one question as you start to think through all of this is, we talked about those stages and efforts that we can make on putting ceiling on our desires, or withdrawing our senses. I mean, those seem like more self-initiated, self-effort. But it turns out that even that's not going to be sufficient, and we need the Bhagavad Anugraha. So what comes first? I mean, do we do our effort and wait for the Anugraha, or do efforts more related to gaining that Anugraha, with the expectation that once we have that, the other things like the senses and all of that will be under control? I mean, that's one thing that maybe I'll open it up for anybody that may want to offer a point of view. I mean, the answer is that eventually that it will only go away with contemplation on the God. But do we start there, or do we have to do some preliminary steps before we get there? Any thoughts on that?
Harish, Suresh, how would I know whether I've got grace or not? I can't wait for grace, right? I'll have to keep doing. And if it so happens that I obtain the grace, I'll perhaps make further progress. Otherwise, maybe I'll not take the right decisions. Anyway, it's all, in some way predetermined. But I have the free will, a limited free will, as Matuji sometimes puts it. So between what is vikarma and karma, and that if I can use that, and what I believe to the best of my knowledge, I'll have to keep doing what I feel is right. Grace perhaps is incidental. Waiting for grace perhaps is inaction in a way, right?
Correct. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's a good point, Sureshji. And the thing is, even when we do a lot of this self-effort thing, the only point there is that we have to be convinced that this is also leading to chitta shuddhi and getting us closer there, versus being frustrated that, I'm doing all of this, but I still have the desires, right? So that can be frustrating at times, but it's important to know that it is a journey, right? I mean, it's not going to be something that will be solved immediately, and as long as there's conviction that it's a journey and we're heading in the right direction, that should give us enough motivation to continue on the path. Any other thoughts?
I feel doing all the activities for Hari Preeti, that gives us the grace. So especially after coming to satsang, we would now have that viveka to do all the activities. You're very aware, and then you do it for Hari Preeti. Then we should work for that anugraha also, I feel.
Very good. Thank you, Pratibhaji. So yeah, so the key takeaway is, mere self-effort is not going to be sufficient. It is a required condition, maybe not a sufficient condition. And just continue with contemplation of God, and in everything we do, satsangas, or your meditations, your your bhajans, your namasparana, all of that will help immensely. Because again, mind you cannot operate in a vacuum, so it needs to be filled. If you don't fill it with something higher, it'll fill itself with other junk. So that's the way I think about it.
Can I come in for a minute?
Sure, Shaji.
Effort and our will, we were talking about what we feel right. I have a little, have something to add to it, because I think we are with the limited intellect and mind, and I think we need gurus' advice and to what to do in this matter. I understood what you said, what we have to do. I mean, what Sureshji said. But we also need Guru's advice for us how to act in this matter.
Correct.
I hope
Yeah.
you, thank you.
Yeah, completely agree. I think, in another thing that was, also quite motivating is, and then again, Madhuji has said this multiple times as well, that, the fact that you have a human birth, and on top of that, you have interest in realizing, I mean, which is true with most of us, a lot, we're already almost there, right? So because that is true. So the only thing that we need is guidance from the guru and continuing on our endeavor. So it would be a lot of our underlying conditions have been met already. Go ahead, Rajiv.
Sorry, I thought I'll just share with whatever I've heard from somewhere, really. Like, for example, it's very difficult to know what's grace, what's God's grace upon all of us, really. What we think is grace may not be the true grace in His ways. For example, one example which they gave was, for example, I was going to the office or the hospital, my car breaks down, I was late and I was cursing, and I feel that the God has not given His grace upon me or has not been looking after me. But somewhere down the line, you realize that about 20 minutes before I would have left, on the same road, there would have been a major crash. And He would have delayed my going, and indirectly, grace has bestowed upon me His grace. So such multiple examples of what we think is not a grace would have been a grace. That is something that we don't have a full knowledge of. What is His grace actually? That's what I thought I will share with you.
Oh, thank you, Raji. It's very insightful. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
Harish, can I very briefly nip in? So lots of discussions on grace and whether we have achieved it or not and so on. So I just wanted to, of course, I think Anandji said that we do need to spend some time think about Jiva Kartrutva and what is our real, position, constitutional position here and so on. So very briefly, so we know that there is Purushakya Prayatna is always there. So you have to make your individual effort for whatever we are doing. That individual effort is definitely influenced by our karmas that we have accumulated over our various janmas. Yeah. So there is this anadi karma that influences. Then, of course, foundational of all this is the jiva swabhava. So I don't think we should ever forget that the three levels, jiva swabhava, anadi karma, purushakya prayatna, that decides what we do. But then in all these three stages, there is always that divine grace. So I think that's also another thing that our acharyas have told, that the divine grace is, yes, for that state of aparoksha jnana, you want to reach that aparoksha jnana, you need to have that ultimate grace of Lord. But at every stage of everything that you're doing, including what Rajji was just mentioning, there is always that grace that is operating. Your karmas are functioning because there is divine grace. You got a body because there is divine grace. You are a jiva who's got a sattvika nature, that probably that abhivakti of the sattvika state also requires divine grace. So in that sense, divine grace is there all the time. It is just that we don't realize it. Because we don't realize it, we don't realize what our Sushruta was saying, na aham karta, hari hi karta. We don't realize that, so that the egocentricity comes in and then we incur karmic imprints and so on. So the grace is actually there all the time. And at different stages of the careers of souls, you probably need that extra grace from Paramatma. For example, to get aparoksha jnana, you need that grace. But the grace is always there, I feel. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhuji. So there's more, discussion on the Sister Prajna. We only covered part of it, so I'll hand it over to Neeta ji to continue the conversation on Sister Prajna. Over to you, Neeta.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Thank you, Harishji, and it's an excellent discussion on grace. So we'll move on with some of the answers that Sri Krishna gives for Arjuna's questions. And Harish had mentioned that control of senses was quite important. So we'll see what are the next few answers that Krishna gives. So Arjuna is asking, like, what are the characteristics of a person or an ideal person or a Sthita Prajna? And he wants to know whose steps he has to follow. So Sri Krishna gives the steps to achieve this and also the challenges that are faced. So from here, from 66 to 72, which brings us to the end of this chapter, these are some of the questions that are answered. So what happens if we cannot control your mind? So far, Harishji has explained that control of mind is very important, or control of senses is very important. And Sthita Prajna, why is his mind steady? What is it that he does that his mind is so steady? What is a person with steady mind interested in? So what does he do? How does he react to all the desires? We react in a different way, but how does a Sthita Prajna react? How does he enjoy the pleasures? Does he not enjoy at all? Does he enjoy? How does he do it? And how do we know that a person is God realized? That is what is described in 72, in Shloka 72. Next slide, please. So in 66, the key message in this one is that what happens if you don't have control over your mind. So if one does not have control over mind, they cannot then meditate, they cannot focus. And if we cannot meditate, then there's no chance of getting moksha or bliss. So that is what, or shanti, that's what is, shanti is also bliss. So that is what is described in this. And it says, if ayukta, that is a word that is repeated here twice, ayuktasya and nachayuktasya bhavna. So ayukta is one with distracted thoughts. So we have to focus, we have to learn to focus. And that is what is highlighted in this. Next one. 67. Again, Shri Krishna he continues with the same theme to say what happens if your mind follows the senses all the time. It keeps going towards those sense objects. He gives an example of a boat with the sails, which gets carried away by a storm. And to such an extent that storm may even seize the ship and also destroy it. So that's how strong the sense objects can be. So we have to be very careful that we don't get carried away by this storm, what it means, prajna, it carries away the prajna. Prajna is the knowledge. So we'll get this, our knowledge and understanding gets destroyed, and we then get lost in the waters of materialism. So be careful that we don't get carried away by the senses. So it's a very good example of a boat and a storm here. Next slide, please. So again, same thing again here is about control of senses. One thing I would like to highlight here is sarvashaha. So it says you have to control sense organs completely. So if you say, okay, I've controlled the four of the five, you want to count them, four and not control one, that also is not good enough. So you have to control all the senses. And then it becomes an aproksha. It's also we use the word mahabahu. So yes, mahabahu means mighty armed, someone who conquers war because he's strong. But we have to be mentally strong to conquer our senses. And this is a big, big effort. And that's why he's used the word mahabahu. Okay, so again, the same example of Katha Upanishad that Harish has mentioned before, it's the same one that we have to remember. We have to control the reins, the mind, and the buddhi has to control those reins, to control the senses. And you can see 5 horses, they can be going in different directions, all 5 horses, taking the chariot away. Okay, next slide. Now, 69, this is a key verse that can be misinterpreted or has been misinterpreted in many by many people. So, ya nisha sarva bhutanam tasyam jagrati sanyami yasyam jagrati bhutani sa nisha pashyato munehe. So, next slide. Well, this explains that much better. Thank you, Anandji, for the slide. So, for everyone, for all of us who feel that this is daytime, means what we are awake about. Awake means what we are aware of. what we think is the light, what we think is the world. So we just see the mundane world, the day-to-day activities, earning money, all those things that we see. So that is daytime for us. And when we are sleeping, means what we are in dark. In dark means we are ignorant about. What we are ignorant about, everyone's ignorant about, is God or knowledge about God. So we are ignorant. So we are, this describes all of us. So what about all of us means maybe there are Sthita Prajnas in here. So sorry if anyone is, but so what about Sthita Prajnas? So yeah, click again, maybe the Sthita Prajna word will come up, but if it's not, it's fine. So Sthita Prajnas, they think of Lord, and so they are, for them, that is the light. So they are awake during everyone else's night time. So that is what it means, that they are aware of God, and all the worldly pleasures, all the mundane things, they don't want to know. They want to be ignorant. They don't want to, they know about them, but they don't get interested in them. So they don't have interest in those, but they're more interested in knowledge about God. That is what this shloka means. So do not take this in a literal way that they're awake at night time. That is not what this means. So what we have to be interested is the knowledge about God. The other word that is mentioned here is munehe or muni. So can anyone tell me what this word means? What a muni, who a muni is?
So Muni can
Sorry.
go for it, Suresh.
Yeah. Is it someone who's actually understood Om in its entirety?
That is correct. Which Upanishad has that been mentioned in?
That's Mundaka, right? I'm not sure.
Mandukya Upanishad. Okay. Sorry, Pratibha ji or Ramesh ji was also, they were to
No, I
answer.
was thinking as in the satsang we had learned that it is the one who does manana.
That's correct. Yeah, that is also right. Someone who does manana. Yeah, so manana, someone who does manana is muni, and they have to do manana of Om, and that is also muni, or who has understood Om completely. So yes, Mandukya Upanishad, fourth khanda, seventh shloka, if you just read that bit. So that is again important to remember. One more thing I'd like to mention is don't go by outwardly appearance of how a person looks. It's more of their inner understanding of God, understanding of Lord. That is what is more important. So this is a key word. So try and remember this shloka of chapter 2. Next slide, please. Yeah, keep going. I think so. Yeah, the animations. Thank you. So again, a very famous shloka, chapter 2. Apuryamanam achala pratishtham samudramapa pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sashanti mapnoti na kama kami. So again, Sthita Prajna should be like an ocean. He is unmoved when all the water from the different rivers joins the ocean. So it may be like a little variation, but not a massive variation. You won't see it. Nobody will see it. So that's how we should be. When all those undesirable desires that come rushing towards this person, he still stays very calm. And that is why he's called a Sthita Prajna. And it's not a person who would go around chasing undesirable pleasures. Okay. And also one more thing to remember is ocean does not make an effort to get supply of water. So he's very calm. He's not seeking any sensory pleasures or undesirable pleasures. Again, an example is quite good because rivers can flood when it rains heavily or dry up in drought. So that doesn't happen with oceans. Again, you may ask a question, can we not enjoy? Yes, you can enjoy, but that should not be an impediment to salvation. It should not stop you from going and doing the right things or going on the right path. So I've given some examples. Can anyone translate this to day-to-day life? I think there are clues there on the slide.
I think Neetaji, your illustration of the TV and sitting in your drawing room is a good one because certainly we don't want to watch any news at this point of time. It's hugely disturbing. Then you just maybe we should just sit and just look at it, and that's it. So that's something that came to my mind.
Also, especially today, that plate of South Indian food is a big disturbance.
Right. So yeah, social media, again, there's so many advertisements everywhere around us, isn't it? So, or anything that we watch can disturb our mind. So we should stay calm and unmoved. Doesn't mean that we should not act on those. We should act on those, but not be overly disturbed. And if someone who likes graphs, you can view it this way. The red one is the one where they get disturbed, and the base one is like an ocean, where the emotional they don't get very emotional easily. Okay, and again, we discussed this about desires. Yes, it's good to have good desires. We've discussed this before. Yeah, next. And again, how does he do this? How, the person who gives up all the material desires and lives free from sense of greed or proprietorship, they don't say mine or I all the time. Yeah, so that is the best way to be. Again, Srimad Acharya has mentioned that desires cannot be given up in total. It's not possible and it's not advocated. So the main thing is to renounce all the sinful desires. That is the key here. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is the last shloka of chapter 2. Esha Brahmi Stitif Partha Nainam Prapya Vimuhyati Stitwasyam Antakale Brahma Nirvanam Richati. So again, we Antakalepi, so we have to remember Lord at the end of a near time of death. Again, that does not come automatically. That is again grace of God. Now, Brahmi Sthiti. So what is Brahmi Sthiti? Is that stage where there is no fear, or person, there's no fear of lapsing into delusion and samsara, and within the sight of assured salvation. And that person does not have any doubts, and he has unswerving devotion to Lord. So that is what we have to remember. That is the sthiti we have to be in. Now, the other thing we have to, remembering God at time of death, that's not easy. This will be discussed more in chapter 8. So chapter 8 deals with this in more detail. So in the last Upanishad lesson by Madhuji, he mentioned about prarabdha karma and the arrows that we've left, that have left the quiver. So the prarabdha karmas, we all have to exhaust those. It may be multiple, we may need multiple births to do that.
To be the same.
Sorry, Shobhaji, you want to come in? You want to ask something? Okay, I'll carry on. So we may need multiple births to exhaust prarabdha karmas. So that the other way to what Krishna is saying is, how do we know that someone has achieved aproksha jnana? Is that he will grace them with his vision, or he'll make them think of God at the time of death. And when that happens, then you know that there'll be no more rebirths. So that is the time. So the other word that I want to highlight here is nirvana. So what does that word mean? Nirvana, it means bodiless, or like Brahman. Or bana, it comes from the word nirbana. Bana means bana are clothes, which are like coverings. So what coverings are we talking about? Linga sharira. So what do we mean by when we lost the linga sharira? Anyone?
Moksha.
Moksha, that's right. So that is what nirvana means. Without clothes, without coverings, or without linga sharira. That is nirvana. And ba also means desires, or someone without desires. So yes, so that is what this shloka talks about. So next slide, please. Let's summarize. So in summary, you can see that control of senses has been highlighted here, and not only here, throughout Bhagavad Gita. It just shows that how important that is. And the description is given of Sthita Prajna, or someone with an established God vision, and that his mind is devoid of desires, and that is fixed in and satisfied with God. So in summary, a Sthita Prajna, it can control senses, and controlling senses is automatic and effortless. Okay, he does not see the mundane worldly pleasures which are night for him. and he basks in the sunshine of divine presence or knowledge. He's calm like an ocean, unmoved by joining rivers, that is sense enjoyments. He's stable wisdom and he does his duties till his prarabdha karmas are exhausted. He's able to focus his mind on God when leaving his final body. So the multiple births, which he may need multiple births to exhaust prarabdha karmas. And he qualifies for fullness of bliss and moksha. Next. So that ends the chapter 2. So I'll end it by chanting this. Om Tat Saditi Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Sankhya Yogo Nama द्वितीयोऽध्यायः अनन्याश्चिन्तयन्तो मां ये जनाः पर्युपासते तेषां नित्याभियुक्तानां योगक्षेमं वहाम्यहम्. श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु.